Hi, and welcome back to the Very Good Gardening Podcast. I'm Kristen McCoy, the creator behind Very Good Gardening on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. That's where I share what it actually looks like to grow food in your own backyard. Today's episode is a little something different. This episode is a big Q&A where we're going to cover lots of different topics that came directly from you. We'll be talking about things like growing garlic, how to harvest different crops, planting potatoes, what gardening zone I'm in here in Maryland, and a bunch of other questions that have come in through my comments. I love doing episodes like this because the chances are pretty high that if one of you is asking a question, there's going to be hundreds of other gardeners that are asking the exact same thing. So hopefully this episode answers a lot of your questions and gives you some confidence going into this year's growing season. Before we jump in, I want to mention a couple of ways that you can support what I'm doing here. If you're interested in some fun gardening merch, head on over to my fourth wall. I've got some gardening t-shirts and other items that help support the podcast. And if you want a little extra content, especially when it comes to cooking what you grow, my bonus view is going to be where all of those recipes are housed. I share exclusive harvest-to-table recipes that you will not find anywhere else. If you'd like the idea of growing your own food and then actually using it in the kitchen, that's where you're going to find lots of ideas. All right, let's get into some gardening questions. For each question, I'm going to share the username and where I got this question. I'm bombarded with thousands of comments every single day, so a lot of times I don't see your question. And I feel like this is a really good place for me to gather a whole bunch of questions that are really commonly asked, and hopefully you guys can get all of your information in one place. Ava asked on TikTok, how do you keep the bugs off the squash? Mine are always getting ruined. Oh, I totally understand. That is so incredibly frustrating. There are two types of bugs that usually attack my squash. The number one is squash bug. That's going to show up every year, no matter what. I cannot do anything to deter it. The best way to deal with a squash bug is to actually kill the eggs before an infestation comes about. The eggs are going to usually be laid in some kind of like geometric shape, and they are going to be like an amber color. You're going to find them on the backs of the leaves. I just take some sticky tape and I put them right on to the leaves, take all of those eggs out, and then they won't ever become adult squash bugs. If I ever do see an adult squash bug, then I am taking that with my bare hands and I'm putting it into a bucket of soapy water. If you get rid of the adult squash bugs, then they can't lay any eggs. This is a lot easier said than done because it can be really overwhelming, especially when there's a big infestation. So I am always aware that I'm going to get those squash bugs, so I am armed with everything that I need whenever I'm going to inspect my squash. And FYI, those pumpkins, they are also going to be attacked by the squash bug because pumpkins and squash and zucchini, they're all in the same family. The second bug that's going to attack my squash and pumpkins is the squash vine borer. This is enemy number one for me. And the reason is because I have yet to find a way to actually eradicate the squash vine borer. So what I have done is tried not to grow squash in its season. The squash vine borer usually shows up at the end of June, and then it's going to stick around pretty much all of July. The good news is, since squash and zucchini are usually pretty fast growers, I can plant squash and zucchini in the beginning of August, and I should still be able to get a harvest. However, I have found that if I look for the squash vine borer egg at the very, very base of the stem of the plant, and I can get rid of all the eggs, the problem usually goes away a lot faster. Last year, I was able to get a whole bunch of squash and zucchini before the squash vine borer showed up. Then once it showed up, all of my plants died and I got none from like the middle of July to the end of the summer. I was okay with that because I got a ton of squash and zucchini before the squash vine borer actually showed up. But if I didn't get that big bumper crop, then I probably would have planted more squash and zucchini for a fall harvest. The eggs of the squash vine borer are really, really tiny, and they are a reddish brown color. They're going to be stuck right at the base of the plant. And then once that egg hatches, the worm actually digs or bores right into the stem, and that's when it gets really, really hard to save the plant. So if you can find those eggs and get rid of them, then they can't become adult squash vine borers or even the worm. But the eggs are really hard to find, so I have just kind of worked around when the squash vine borer usually shows up. I hope that helps. I know that there really isn't any way to get rid of either one of the squash vine borers or the squash bugs, but sometimes you just kind of have to work with nature and grow things when they are not going to be so much of a nuisance. Mira from TikTok says, how do you know when the garlic is ready to be picked? I planted some in the fall. We live in New Jersey. I planted for the first time, so I'm excited to see what happens in the spring if they'll shoot up. My question for you, Mira, is have your garlic popped up yet? So the reason I ask is because I plant my garlic in mid-October. October 15th is when I always plant my garlic. Now, I don't know what growing zone that you're in, but if you planted around that time, typically, even in New Jersey, I would think, you should have seen some of that garlic pop up already. So if you're not seeing any garlic leaves coming up through the soil, I would check to see if your garlic is still there. Squirrels definitely love to dig up my garlic. And I would also consider maybe planting an early garlic now. Your garlic will be a lot smaller, but it's something. But if your garlic has popped up through the ground, then you're good to go. It really doesn't start growing faster until I would say the end of March is when I usually see that it starts to grow a little bit more. Now, if you planted hardneck garlic, then you're going to be able to harvest the garlic scapes probably somewhere around mid to end of May. And you really want to make sure that you harvest those garlic scapes because otherwise the plant is going to focus on making that garlic scape into a bloom, when really you want all of its energy to go down into the bulb and making it bigger. I then harvest whether it's soft neck or hard neck when I would say 80% of the leaves are brown and crispy. I also don't like to harvest after it's rained for a few days because then the bulb can kind of rot a little bit because it's wet when it comes out of the ground. So I like to harvest after it's been dry for a few days. It just helps with the drying and curing of the garlic. Tired as a Mother 314 on Instagram, love your username. She says, is it true that homegrown asparagus is less woody when it's this large? Like grocery store asparagus is nearly inedible at this size, but this looks amazing. So the short answer is no, it's not true. The long answer is that I do not eat the entire part of the asparagus spear when they get that long. I snap that spear where it naturally breaks because that bottom part is going to be exactly what you said. It's going to be woody. But the top part is going to be perfectly edible. Now, I have experimented with taking that woody end of it and peeling the outside, and it does sometimes end up being very tender, but I would say that most of the time when they're that big, even if I peel off the outer layers, it's still too tough for me to eat. Love Lexi on TikTok says, when is a good time to plant potatoes? Well, I am in Zone 7B in Maryland, and I plant my potatoes on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, every year. Now, you might want to adjust that based on where you are, but it's always worked really well for me. And it's also easy for me to remember because potatoes and Ireland, they kind of go together. So I always plant my potatoes on St. Patrick's Day, and it's a good little reminder that spring is right around the corner. Meme, I think that's how you pronounce it, Meme53 on Instagram asks, are the ground cherries also known as gooseberries? So gooseberries and ground cherries are technically two different things. However, I do believe they have similar tastes and they grow obviously very similarly as well. Gooseberries, I've heard, are much bigger than ground cherries, and gooseberries are usually found in Africa and Australia. correct me if I'm wrong, but ground cherries are all that I can really find here, and they are a lot smaller, and I think their flavor is more intense. A lot of people mix them up and they call them gooseberries in my comments, and they get really mad at me for calling them ground cherries, but that's what they are. They are ground cherries. Technically, they're different from gooseberries, but I don't really mind if you want to call them gooseberries or ground cherries. It doesn't matter to me. City Lights 2350 on YouTube says, why so many different varieties? I get this question all the time, and the answer is really pretty simple. We as humans eat with our eyes, and if I look down at my plate and I just see one color or just bland brown, I'm not going to be as excited to eat it as if I see all kinds of different colors and textures and sizes. A caprese salad with all different colored tomatoes with different sizes and shapes is one of the most beautiful things that I make from my garden produce. Every single time I make that, my daughter comes in and is like, "That's beautiful," and she eats the whole thing. Now, this might surprise a lot of you, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of raw tomatoes. I will eat tomatoes and lots of other things, but if it's a caprese salad, I'll put that cheese and a little bit of tomato and a little bit of basil on there, but I will never eat a tomato by itself. Also, on a caprese salad, it's going to have a ton of olive oil and balsamic vinegar, so that makes it taste extra good too. But my teenage daughter will eat every single tomato on that plate because it looks so beautiful. Now, she does like raw tomatoes, but she would not attack a caprese salad plate like that if it was just the same color red. I know because I've tried it before. I just did regular red tomatoes all around a plate, and she ate like half of it. If I'm making fajitas and I want to get some peppers, having those different colored peppers in there is just so exciting. I also make a dish with peppers and onions and tomatoes and sauce and some pasta, and I have all different colored ingredients in there, including purple and green basil. So honestly, the answer is simple. We eat with our eyes. The more variety that we have, the more likely we are to eat. And it's really fun to grow all different kinds of varieties because they do have different purposes. And with some crops that I grow, like tomatoes, it actually matters what variety that you're using based on what you want to make. For sauce, I like to use paste tomatoes because paste tomatoes are a little meatier. They don't have as much juice in them, and they can break down and be a thicker consistency faster. For salsa, I want to use a pineapple tomato every single time. Pineapple tomatoes are the sweetest, and they do make the best salsa. It's an irrefutable fact. In the same vein, Anastasia on TikTok says, what's the difference in the potatoes except for their color? Potatoes are another crop that you want to use certain potatoes for different things. A russet potato is going to be a great baked potato. Yukon Gold, they make excellent chips and french fries. If I want to roast potatoes, I want to use those Purple Majesties. Purple Majesty holds up to the roasting better than any other potato I grow. Add a little garlic and onion in there too, and it's just delicious. But at the same time, it also is really cool to have different colored potatoes on your plate. So it's the same answer. Samantha on TikTok says, how long is garlic good for? How do you store them to make them last longer? I am still using the fresh garlic that's in my pantry right now that I harvested in late June and early July. That garlic will last me until I harvest the next round of garlic. I know a lot of people say that garlic doesn't last that long, that it's an 8 to 9 month in your pantry, but for me, it does last that long. And if I ever see that my garlic is about to sprout, which is how it goes bad, then I will take that head of garlic and I will cut off all of the sprouts. I will mince it and then I'll freeze it. I like to freeze it in little cubes. It works really well. But the reason that my garlic is lasting that long is because I make sure to cure it properly. When I pull out my garlic, I do not wash the dirt off of it. Even though every single person in my comment is like, wash the garlic, wash the garlic. And I get it. You want to see a nice clean bulb of garlic. The problem is that when you clean it off with any kind of water, it's going to add moisture into the garlic, but really you want it to be as dry as possible. So I take the garlic and I leave the stem on. I use the leaves to actually tie them up on a pole. I have a clothes rack that I use, and it has a pole that goes across horizontally, and I just tie all the leaves up and they hang down and they dry. That curing process usually takes between 6 to 8 weeks in my cold, dry basement. I know that the garlic is completely cured when all of the leaves are completely dry and crispy. And then it actually becomes really fun. I'll take the whole stem of garlic and I'll pull it down and it comes right off. Then I clean everything and then I put it into a little basket in my pantry and I pull out the garlic whenever I need it. I have so much garlic still in my pantry. It's pretty cool. And I'll start giving that garlic away once I start harvesting new garlic in June and July. My dad especially really loves homegrown garlic and he uses it in his cooking all the time. So I'll just give him a bulb or two every once in a while just because he's my dad and I love him. Also, if you want a deep dive on garlic, head on over to my episode 4 where it gives you everything you need to know. I don't want to call myself a garlic expert, but I do have it down where I am using my own garlic and I never buy it from the store anymore. Hellier Family 157 on YouTube says, any tips on how to have fruitful blueberries? First things first, make sure that you have 2 different varieties of blueberries or else you're not going to get any fruit. Maybe there are some self-pollinating blueberry varieties, but I don't know of any. You need 2 varieties so that they can pollinate each other. That's step number 1. You need at least 2 plants and they should be different varieties. Number 2 is get a soil test of where you're planning on putting those blueberries. Because blueberries thrive in highly acidic soil. You want your soil to be at least a 5.5 pH. If it is not acidic enough for blueberries, all is not lost. There are plenty of things you can do to amend the soil so that it becomes more acidic over time. There's also blueberry fertilizers that you can add to just kind of help give it the nutrients that it needs in the soil. Once you have your soil exactly the way that you want it, then you want to plant those blueberries and protect them from all predators. I had a bunny that came in and hopped right under a little fence that we had there and ate all of the blueberries that it could reach from its 2 little hind legs. I had a suspicion that that is what was happening, and then it was confirmed when I did in fact see that little bunny almost using my blueberry branches to help prop her up. I couldn't be too mad at the bunny because, let's be honest, those blueberries are delicious. However, from then on, we made sure that the fence went all the way to the bottom so that the bunny could not get through. The next thing you want to protect from is birds. I like to use rubber snakes and I put them all throughout the bushes. Birds do not like snakes. They see the snakes, they don't care what color it is, it looks real to them, and they won't go near. If that doesn't work for you, you can always get an owl and move that around, a little fake owl, of course, not a real one. And then last resort is getting a netting over your blueberry bushes. Make sure that you're only netting over those blueberry bushes after they have been pollinated. Once you see the little blueberry when it's green, that's how you know it's been pollinated. Then you can add that netting over. If you add the netting too soon, those bees are not going to be able to go in and pollinate, and so you will get 0 blueberries. RZ Wife on TikTok asks, what ratio of sand, perlite, etc. do you use? First of all, I don't use any sand. I have super hard clay natural soil, so I need to use all of my raised beds. So I am creating my own soil environment in my beds. Now that soil is then leaching into my hard clay soil and converting it into really good usable stuff. But that's taken years. So if I'm just going to start a new bed, here's the formula that I use. First, it's going to be 50% compost. I really like leaf grow, and if you're in Maryland, I highly suggest that you get a whole bunch of leaf grow, and I know that I've been able to get it in bulk from certain places, so consider that. Then it's going to be 25% perlite or vermiculite. I go with whichever one is the most available and the cheapest. They both do the exact same thing, so I don't really care which one I get. Then it's going to be about 10 to 15% of coco coir. The perlite or vermiculite is going to help your soil drain, while the coco coir is going to help your soil retain some water. They work together to create the perfect soil. And then that last 10 to 15% is going to be aged manure. I'm going to get our aged manure from our barn because as of a few years ago, my father-in-law kept a whole bunch of sheep in there, and we just scoop it up and put it into the beds. If you do not have that, I suggest that you ask around. I bet there are a lot of farmers around you that are willing to either trade or maybe even just give you some of their aged manure. I find that this combination has worked really well. My soil is very healthy and I always have tons of worms in it, which I think is the number one check for soil health in my opinion. Obviously, I forgot to say that if you have your own homegrown compost, that is gold. You want to definitely use that as well. I mix that in with that 50% compost. I'm going to use as much of my homegrown as I can, and then I'll fill in with that leaf grow. Brandy on TikTok says, can we see how your garden is laid out? I don't have any footage of my garden from the air. That is going to change this summer because I actually gave my husband a drone for Christmas. I gave it to him for a completely different reason, but as we were just sitting in the backyard the other day, he was playing around with it and he was like, I can see your entire garden from here. I was like, oh my gosh, we should use that this summer. So this summer I'm definitely going to show where everything is because we have like 4 main gardening spaces. So I'll kind of show you how everything is laid out on our property. Dear Tanya on Instagram, she says, question, because I'm completely clueless, but I want to start growing some things with my kids. Do you have to use any pesticides if it's on your land? It's a genuine question. You don't need to feel bad about asking that question. I totally understand why you're asking. So I use one pesticide, and that is BT on my brassicas. That's because I have tried to combat the cabbage moth in every way that I could think of, and nothing was successful. The only thing that I have found to work is that BT. It is organic and it's supposed to be selective in that it only kills the cabbage moth worm, but I don't like that I use it. I do use insecticidal soap on my lemon trees when they are in the greenhouse because the mealybugs, they will attack it and kill the entire tree if I don't do that. But for my outside gardens, I only ever use BT on my brassica plants. And even then, I am spraying in the very, very, very early mornings. If I can get out before the sun gets up, that's when I want to do that. Or in the evenings as the sun is going down. And that's because these times are when the bees and other pollinators are going to be less active. I also feel more comfortable spraying BT on my brassicas because these are not flowering plants. At least they're not supposed to be. If they're flowering, then I have let it go too long and I forgot to harvest. So they're not attracting as many pollinators as, say, a tomato plant would. So no, you don't need to use pesticides. I really do think that there are enough solutions for tomatoes and peppers and corn that you don't have to spray anything. Again, I did change my mind with brassicas because I really love broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and that's the only thing that's worked. But I am very, very mindful to make sure that I am only doing that when the pollinators are not out. Now, I think the reason that you're asking this is because you have children, and I have children as well. And I agree that that's something really big to consider. So I don't think that you need to use pesticides. You can do companion planting. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do. And maybe I honestly need to do an entire episode on pesticides. So thanks for the idea. Be on the lookout for that episode. It's Jazz here on Instagram asks, why are your carrots so tiny every time? First of all, I do not think that they are tiny every single time. My spring carrots tend to be a lot bigger than my winter carrots, and that has to do with winter just being so long and not enough light, so they don't grow as much as my spring carrots do. I also forget to thin them. Let's just be real here. I forget every single time. I forget to thin them. And it's usually the varieties that I'm growing. I like different colored carrots, and sometimes they can be on the smaller side, especially if I don't thin them. But every once in a while, when a carrot is naturally thinned and it's all by itself and it has enough room to grow, I can grow a really decently sized carrot. I just don't do it every time, and that's okay. I'm okay with it. If you don't like it, you don't have to watch. Make sure that you thin your carrots out like I always say that I'm going to, and maybe your carrots will be bigger than mine. Tiff Strawn 91 from TikTok asks, what did you end up doing with the soil from the potatoes? I have a bag of soil from my first grow of potatoes and don't know what to do with it. This is actually a great question. I really love it because a lot of times you have this extra soil, which a lot of the nutrients have been depleted from it, and you don't know what to do with it. And if you have a compost, the best thing you can do is put that soil right into your compost. It'll give it some material to use with and bulk up your compost as well. But if you don't have a compost and you do want to use that soil again, here's what I recommend doing. First, we're trying to add more nutrients into that soil. So that is going to be compost. It's going to be perlite. That's not for nutrients, but that's for drainage, because anything that came out with your soil when you were harvesting the potatoes, you want to add that perlite back in. And next, you want to add in some blood meal and some bone meal. This is going to add those macronutrients that your soil is now lacking, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That's going to add those back into your soil. Mix it all up and then grow something new. That soil really doesn't need to go to waste. You can reuse it. I do it all the time. And for our last question of this episode, Ishrat from TikTok says, do you know what would be good to grow in a state that is only warm 3 to 4 months out of the year? This is a tough question to answer because there's a lot of factors here. When you say warm, I don't know what that means. Does that mean above 60 degrees? Does that mean above 80 degrees? I'm not quite sure what warm means to you. But if I'm going to think about a comparable growing zone, I'm going to think about growing zone maybe 4. I know there's a lot of people in the Midwest that are in that growing zone, so let's talk about what you could grow if that was your zone. First, you can grow a lot of things in a very short amount of time. Squash, zucchini, corn, green beans, these are all very fast crops. Oh, and cucumbers. All of these are going to grow and you're going to be able to harvest them rather quickly. I plant all of those by seed in early May, and I'm harvesting from all of those plants by the end of July. That's not even 3 months. So all of those are quick growing crops that'll be able to grow in a warm environment. And you also have the ability to grow a whole bunch of cool weather crops like carrots and radishes, lettuce, snap peas, brassicas, that includes broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. All of those are going to be able to thrive more in your environment because you have a longer cool weather season. If I'm thinking about things that might be tough for you to grow, I'm going to say watermelon, peppers, pumpkins. That's because these all have really long growing seasons. Tomatoes, I am sure you could figure it out, but you would 100% need to start those seeds indoors. If you're not starting your seeds indoors, there's no chance that from seed to harvest, you would have enough time to get any kind of harvest. But it's absolutely possible for you to grow a whole bunch of things that you could then preserve and eat throughout your colder months. All right, that's going to wrap up this gardening Q&A episode. I always love hearing what you're curious about, what you're growing in your own garden, and anything that you're struggling with. I am a teacher, so this is something that I love to do. I love answering questions and just helping people grow their own gardens. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure that you're following the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer in any future Q&As that I might do, make sure that you're commenting on all my socials. And I think for next time, I might put out a very specific post asking for your questions to answer. And again, if you want to support the podcast, you can head over to my fourth wall for some gardening merch and my bonus view for any of those harvest to table videos. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you on the next episode. Happy gardening and go grow something very good.